use, low, web, use, low, web radio, use, low, web radio. Use Low Web Radio, la radio che non ti giudica.
Scarica la nostra app Use Low Web Radio per Apple e Android.
Tudor Stoicescu, Director of Regulatory Solutions and Compliance Online, and speaker at the event Interpretation of the Law Through Mathematical Models, organized by Luigi Viola, to make the bridge between the UK and Italy and compare discussions on predictive justice happening in common law countries. Welcome to Svegliati Avvocatura.
Thank you for having me on.
At the event, you opened your speech mentioning how some tasks performed while you were a lawyer were repetitive, monotonous, and frustrating. Do you so support the Silicon Valley guru's view about the humanity moving forward towards a completely different type of work?
Partially, but not entirely. I am a firm believer that new jobs will be created because technology leads to it. You only have to look at historical progress to realize that that is something that happens all the time. However, I would caveat this with two important things. One, change doesn't happen overnight. And two, not every single form of work will necessarily be changed to a completely different one. If I take away the scribe and I give them a printing press, that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't no longer write books and that there's no more jobs for writers. At the same time, I will consider that for lawyers, you might take away some of the boring stuff such as contract review, matter management, but not necessarily the concept of being a legal advisor or a disputer.
Absolutely. Speaking about changes that happen over time and sometimes maybe revolutions that happen over time, can you share with us what the Fourth Industrial Revolution is?
So the Fourth Industrial Revolution is a term that Klaus Schwab, the founder and director of the World Economic Forum, coined. Essentially, it is a term that he uses to encapsulate the current advent of technologies that are impacting the economy today. The interesting aspects there are big data with artificial intelligence, as well as probably cyber technologies, although I don't think I will see a lawyer with a chip in his head, which is telling him what to say very soon. But that's still a distinct possibility. You never know. However, in terms of how this fits into what I was presenting at the conference the other day, the availability of new technology and new resources to the legal profession is actually something that must be seen, one, as an opportunity, but two, as a risk, shall we say it. So I do believe that certain lawyers are not prepared yet and are not following the right mindset, and change is happening. So raising awareness and having more people understand how this could impact their way of work is something that's quite important to raise awareness on.
Yeah, definitely. Also because changes happens anyway, whether you adapt to it or not. And now you mentioned your work. I bet you've seen innovative systems implemented in the legal sector, or at least considered, some of which can maybe be categorized as predictive justice. And so I'm asking you where the liability stays.
So I will note that legal technology tends to be mostly boring stuff right now. However, if you consider predictive justice, simple things such as a workflow of I have identified misconduct in my organization based on some compliance tests, and I would like to raise this. If I would like to identify it as data breach potentials and reports to the regulators, or if I would like to identify this as general process and compliance failings that organizations are supposed to report on, not only have we had this for years already, but the liability models for these are actually well established. So I will note that, one, in order to actually establish liability to a software provider, the client who might be utilizing and affected by this, or even, for example, the overseeing authorities, generally takes a lot of due diligence process being performed at the outset before you deploy a solution. So I will say that sometimes you could argue the algorithm resulted in an unlawful outcome because the specification that it was coded under was either biased or not scheduled correctly. However, that is a term of professional and human error, and this can happen especially if you don't understand the subject. In general, in terms of liability, from what I've seen, it's vicarious liability carried by the user of the software because it's considered as though it's an outsourced provider or just a tool you utilize to perform a task. Again, this is also because of the fact that no really advanced capabilities have been implemented with predictive justice yet or any close to it. But if past trends are indicative, you will look at the software piece as being treated almost like an employee. However, if you think about it, usually when you outsource an activity, you tend to contract for liability. So I think a lot of machine liability will actually be contracted for rather than regulated for the time being. Longer term, we don't know. I'm not sure if the machine will have rights, but again, it might have duties if it has rights.
Maybe we will have to have this discussion again in 10, 20 years. Who knows?
I'd say more like 3. But...
Well, that's very optimistic. I don't know. It depends on the country, maybe. Even though you think that the technology applied to the legal sector is quite boring, still, to quote you, interpretations of the law as clear and accessible as possible to non-lawyers can be really, really useful gold for, I don't know, I can think of the legal department of a company or the like. I can picture a number of lawyers getting scared by such statement. What would you tell them?
I tell them it's as though the scribes got scared when the Gutenberg press was first released, because you would look at it through a multifaceted problem. If we start from a public policy perspective, you've got a serious issue with access to justice. There is more in terms of issues and the ongoing disputes out there than the market, if we call it as such, in terms of legal services can provide solutions for. In general, the first wave of revolution in terms of legal capacity and technology is limited to the boring stuff. So I'm saying it's not necessarily that everything will be as understandable as possible for non-lawyers. But if you look at the sector, the clients are demanding better service, quicker, faster, more effective, more appropriate to business to provide decisions. So therefore, where the rule is clear-cut, such as VAT is X%, you kind of don't want that to be something you have to go to the lawyer for. So there's a lot of information like that out there in the codes. And one of the things I've done is study regulation and try to spot the repetition, the simple rules. Again, they need to become more IT literate, right? Like I see, in a sense, in an ideal universe, a future of legal technologists, as one of my old mentors called it. You have access to all of these information points. You find the disputable and uncertain areas, and that's where you apply your legal training and expertise to. So in a sense, you create more opportunity for more interesting work for everybody. The route to becoming qualified will actually imply you doing more high-level work early on, which might make it more strenuous, I will admit. And it does raise questions as to how we train the next generation of lawyers if the boring stuff goes away. But
well, that should be a good thing.
Yeah, I know. But still, do we want to, as some say, invent law on the spot? No, not necessarily. But maybe that's where we're moving towards. A case of where in common systems you actually deal in legal creation, and in civil systems you actually identify fallacies and problems and disputes.
Yeah, I understand. So more interpretation than simply being an intermediary between the letter and the client.
Yeah, I mean, will that mean that civil systems will start becoming a bit more common law based for the disputable and complicated areas, or that common law systems will become more prescriptive, or there's a midway point? There's things to think about. I finish off going back to my initial analogy of the Gutenberg press. Books used to be a commodity and the literacy was high. Then few hundred years later, the newspaper industry flourished, magazines are everywhere, books are everywhere, information is accessible. We've progressed by leaps and bounds because of it. Access to justice reducing the necessary expenses of very simple disputes, simplifying the process and making society more aware of its rights and obligations. Pretty powerful thing if you think about it in a sense, especially if you can make some basic concepts accessible and you focus policy intent on the areas that matter more.
Absolutely. And speaking about policies, you can't avoid talking about lobbying and the possibilities that something goes wrong because of it. So what are the issues if having regtech industry players influencing the future of predictive justice?
I look at the general rule-based technologies approach, so everything from law tech, insurtech, whatever you want to call them, fintech to a certain degree, right? So you have to consider that today the industry is still too young for it to pose any major risks. There is a lot of engagement from core regulators, like they speak to them, have them as advisors and mentors for the industry and trying to build practical solutions. This is all opportunity. But again, in terms of potential issues, you've got just standard Silicon Valley problems, right? Ethical use of data, adequate governance frameworks and controls, appropriateness of the managers in the industry and procedural frameworks. The general understanding of these solutions, I think, is one of the highest risks that we run into, because you will need a group of technical experts who get what these actually do. I will say that us educating ourselves in how machines work, how do you test that without understanding how the machine works? How do you oversee predictive justice built into an algorithm without actually understanding why that algorithm is designed a certain way? And we also have to acknowledge that bugs will happen, issues will occur, and we just need good frameworks to deal with any disputes, provide adequate compensation where necessary, but also create environments to promote this innovation. And you did have, I think a few years ago, an initiative by the Supreme Court in England and Wales to investigate the possibility of having an automated court. So there are steps being undertaken in this, and there are movements being made towards that direction. But again, the governance issue and the understanding issue, I think, strike me as the most important areas.
I was about to ask you, predictive justice, yes or no, but I would add, predictive justice now or...
Now for simple basic stuff with proper oversight and consultation. Predictive justice is something that's happening anyway. If you have an algorithm that runs basic financial regulatory reporting, it's predictive justice. It's responding to regulatory requirements and fulfilling an objective. It's not necessarily as crazy as presenting it with a set of facts in a murder case and telling you who's guilty. I'll give you that. And that's, I think many people tend to jump the gun and think 50 steps down the line. We might get there one day, although I think that's still where the lawyer will have his place for the very long foreseeable future because of discretion elements and the way the human mind works. And the fact that automation is in its infancy. If you feed an algorithm a big chunk of data, it will do impressive things which humans can't do. But if it has to think abstractly and creatively, it won't. So therefore, I would say yes to predictive justice for areas where it can be applied, where there's a lot of repetition, there is a lot of sequentiality, and there's a lot of predictiveness in the facts and the outcomes themselves. That is a good thing. It's just efficiency. I will say that going forward for more advanced things, however, do ensure proper governance controls and consultation is engaged in while you build these solutions, and create collaborative environments, because it's not going to be, in my mind, a single service provider which will solve this problem, but it will be multiple cogs in the area. So the future will be more of this, I think, whether we like to or not.
Silenzio in aula! Si dichiara il sistema colpevole di lentezza e complicatezza.
Con il processo civile telematico e la fattura elettronica, la giustizia italiana fa un passo importante verso la digitalizzazione. Sistemi, grazie all'esperienza maturata a contatto con i professionisti, offre Studio, il software che permette di gestire con efficienza le attività degli studi legali.
Chiamate noi o il più vicino dei nostri partner. Insieme a voi per lavorare, produrre, creare e innovare. Insieme sistemiamo l'Italia. Insieme per ogni soluzione. www.sistemi.com.
Libertà e diritto per diffondere giustizia. È con la passione che si raggiungono i grandi traguardi e le frequenze di Uslow Web Radio pulsano di amore per la nostra professione. Questa è la radio degli avvocati che parla agli avvocati. In onda ogni giorno tutte le novità normative, gli approfondimenti e le interviste sui temi di attualità passano da qui. Use Law Web Radio, il vostro appuntamento quotidiano con la giustizia.